Hey everyone, welcome back to Nope, We're Not Monogamous. I'm your host and relationship coach, Alicia Payne. And today we're going to get real about the emotional side of non monogamy. If you ever feel lost when you're facing jealousy or insecurity in your relationships, you're not alone, obviously. And there's a lot better ways to handle it than just getting over it. Today I've got Lola Phoenix joining me to help unpack all of this. And Lola isn't just someone who writes about non-monogamy, they live it. And they share their learning through their books like The Anxious Person's Guide to Non-Monogamy and their new Non-Monogamy journal. And they also have a popular podcast called Non-Monogamy Help. So they've been through it all. They have tons of insights to share. In today's episode, Lola's going to talk about why it's crucial to have clear boundaries, what ethical polyamory really looks like, and how to build an emotional toolkit that actually works for you. Plus, we're going to talk about the importance of community support in making your relationships work. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the feelings that come with open relationships with non-monogamy, polyamory, swinging, stick around. This conversation might just change how you handle those challenges. And if you find our conversation today helpful, don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcasts at. And please, please, please drop a review. It really helps spread the word and let other people know we're out here. Enjoy. Welcome and thank you for coming on to Nope, We're Not Monogamous.
Thank you.
I'm really happy to have you. I would love if you could tell the listeners just real quick who you are.
Yeah, so I'm Lola Phoenix. I'm the author of The Anxious Person's Guide to Non-Monogamy. I also write a weekly advice column and podcast called Non-Monogamy Help. So people write me different questions and things like that. And I kind of fell into that on accident. I kind of got into, I was really into LiveJournal and into the Sex Tips LiveJournal community, actually. And I liked helping people. And I became sort of super interested in sexuality as like a autistic hyper focus thing. And eventually it kind of went into polyamory. Just there are a lot of common communities there. And over time, when I was giving advice as well on polyamory subreddits and forums, people started emailing me directly for advice. And I was like, oh, I enjoy doing this. Maybe I should like do a column. That would be kind of fun. And yeah, it just came into a column, went into a podcast, went into a book. And I've also written the Non-Monogamy Journal, which is a little bit more for folks to kind of test out their boundaries, like see different scenarios. So yeah, that's basically me.
Sorry, I just sneezed.
No worries. No worries.
That's amazing. I really enjoyed your book.
Thank you.
Being an anxious person. Um, I'm curious. So, excuse me. So you wrote the Anxious Person's Guide to Non-Monogamy, and then now you're
Mhm.
coming out with the Non-Monogamy Journal. Is that
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
That's amazing. I love it. I was going through the Non-Monogamy Journal and looking at the way you did all of these like scenarios or situations that you might find yourself in, and then how to like break it down and kind of dig into what's going on and find your way through it. And I absolutely love that. And I'm curious how you came to figure out that structure.
Mhm. Well, I think when I noticed when I was giving people advice, a lot of the kind of difficulty of the situation was firstly that they had never encountered a situation before. Like some things you'll encounter in both monogamy and polyamory, right? Like it's relationships, human nature. But for some people, these situations, they didn't have any kind of cultural scripts for. If we think about monogamy, like you kind of are faced with monogamous situations throughout media. Your friends are in situations, you have a community you can ask about if stuff happens to you. Even if you go into Reddit's relationships thread, like there's so many different places where you get exposure. So if it does happen to you, you might have already kind of thought about, oh, what would I do in this situation? So I think that the difficulty can sometimes be that A, you're introduced to this brand new, and then you don't have a community. Like a lot of people don't have a community. And even if you have a community of polyam people, maybe they all know you and your partner. So it's like
Mhm.
awkward to like ask them. And there's also a kind of shame thing that happens in a lot of communities where like you don't want to be seen as having a problem in your relationship because
Yeah.
your reputation, like there's issues around that, right? So as I was going through this, I was like, actually, I see this situation happening quite a lot. Or this is such a unique situation that I think a lot of people wouldn't have really thought of this. And this actually presents a really challenging ethical scenario that people should maybe think about because it will lead to often other discussions. So I kind of thought about it initially in different themes because I organize my columns in different themes like managing emotions, long distance, things like that. So I tried to kind of sort them through different themes. I wrote out like the sort of common like a little bit of common scenarios that I would see both like in all of the Reddit stuff I've done and like all of the columns that I've done. And then I would also think about, okay, what are some basic things that people should also think about, especially with regards to like STI things, and
Mhm.
your boundaries around that. So I tried to think about major themes and I tried to include things that you might come across, like definitely might that you wouldn't necessarily think. And then also like things that maybe are a little bit random, but still are interesting to think about and interesting to talk with a partner about. And if do you want me to give you an example?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the scenarios, and I can find it in the book if you want me to find it, but, one of the scenarios is that I sometimes see, not necessarily always, but it presents itself in different ways, is a person who is known in their community or online as being with someone, so everyone sort of
Mhm.
thinks they're monogamous, and they kind of find themselves getting in touch with an old flame or someone that they were previously interested in, or someone who has the perception that they're monogamous and then starts to be really flirty and then starts to kind of ask them out without knowing that they're polyamorous. So sometimes people are so caught up in the fact that, oh, it's this old flame. I'm so excited. It's like, yeah, it's this old flame, but they think you're monogamous
Uh-huh.
and they're okay with helping you cheat. Is that really a person? Then you have to think about, is that a person that's okay for you to be with as someone
Mhm.
and I think a lot of people as well don't realize, especially when they're in scenarios where they're thinking of opening up their relationship for this one person and this one chance,
Uh-huh.
the one that got away, is some people are fine helping people cheat, but they don't wanna be non-monogamous in an ethical way.
Yeah.
So, there's lots of things like that, and, like, what would you do if your partner was interested? Is there an ethical dilemma there of like someone thinks that they're helping you cheat even though you aren't cheating? What if you allow them to continue to think that? Is
Yeah.
that okay? If it's a one night stand, maybe you think that's okay. Like there's lots of things that I think people don't you never see that kind of scenario. I mean, maybe as time goes on, we'll see that in, an episode of modern day friends or what have you. But like that
Right.
as now, like it's not I've never seen that in any kind of media. So when it
Mhm.
happens, people there's no guidebook. There's no it's the shock of the scenario as well as the uniqueness of the scenario that's so jarring for them.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and trying to work through it in like, okay, if I'm non-monogamous, is like where are the lines? And they
Yeah.
tend to feel really wobbly without having, hundreds of years of what everybody is supposed to do backing it up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. Were there any, I'm curious if you have any was there any favorite scenario that you wrote about?
Mhm. I think the thing that I always like to I think it's one of the scenarios, I can't remember which one, but the thing that I always like to really encourage people to think about is kind of examine their sort of childhood or their teenage education around STIs and what assumptions they make based on that. Because I know like my biggest kind of moment of reckoning and was, I'm not as much of a casual person, and that's fine. I tend to date people who are more casual people. And I remember in one relationship that I had, I kind of wanted to enforce this rule. To be fair, I am immunocompromised, so I do have reasons to be worried about my health. But like, I wanted to enforce a rule of like, okay, you can't sleep with someone until you've known them for at least a week. And my partner rightfully pushed back on that. I was like, well, what is a week going to do with regards to STIs? Like, that's not going to matter. And I was like, oh, actually, that's true. Like, I think there's a lot that goes into STIs that I think sometimes people make assumptions. There's definitely one relationship that I had where I both assumed that we had the same conception of what safe sex was, and we
Mhm.
didn't. And then they ended up having what I would have called unsafe sex with someone, and I was really uncomfortable. And they were like, well, that isn't what I thought it was. So, like, I think there's so many things around STIs, especially in the US when you don't really get any kind of good sex education. It's really worth us just kind of thinking about your boundaries around that and thinking about where those boundaries come from. Because I think
Yeah.
that those are the boundaries that sometimes people feel a little bit more comfortable with asserting, or like boundaries, and sometimes they're just rules,
Uh-huh.
to control somebody else's behavior. I think people feel more confident about that because of the conceptions of clean and dirty and things like that. So I think that my favorite ones are those because I think some of this stuff people wouldn't have thought about, and this will be the first time, or they'll have thought about it, but they haven't thought about it from a non-monogamy standpoint. But I think people do and have thought about STIs, but they haven't really had the education about it to necessarily pick it apart, or they don't understand that, like, all sex has a risk to it, and you can minimize that, but you can't completely get rid of it. So
Yeah.
I think though that would probably be one of my favorites that I hope that people find a little bit, they maybe have that moment that I did where I was like, "Oh, actually, is this rule, is this attempt to control the situation really gonna control it?"
Right, right, yeah. No, that makes so much sense. This idea that, like, well, the better you know someone, the less likely they are to have an STI? Like
Not
sometimes our
really.
logic does weird jumps.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the more comfortable you feel, like, trusting that they're gonna tell you the truth, but if you begin a relationship believing someone's lying to you, you
Yep,
know
I say that all the time, like, if you can't trust what they're telling you, why are you having sex with them?
Yeah. Yeah.
And for some
But
people, that's a thing. High risk sex is the thing. Uh,
or they
totally
just
fine.
don't wanna ask,
Or they don't wanna
you know?
ask. Yeah, yeah. There is that, like, fear or shame around just talking about it.
Yeah.
Totally. Totally. Are there any scenarios that you wrote about that were, like, from your own experience?
A few of them were. One of the ones that I was actually my first experience of technically non-monogamy. And it was around I was very, very much in the idea of I'm gonna prepare, I'm gonna read, I'm gonna know, and then I won't have any negative emotions, right?
Yeah.
I'll do like what I refer to as like the polyamory PhD, right? Like I'm gonna study, and I'm not gonna have any. I'm gonna be ready. And I ended up in a situation where basically someone used me to cheat, more or less. But I knew who their partner was, and I wanted to talk to them. I was like, "Yeah, I can add them on Facebook and talk to them." And the person was like, "No, no, no." And there were contexts where it made a little bit of sense for them to, because they were like, "I'd prefer you meet in person," and I was gonna be in the area, so it wasn't completely, but I think what I learned from that is, like, I didn't wanna be jealous, like, that's the thing, and, like, so many of my sort of alarm bells were ringing, but I was like, "Oh, but that's jealousy, and I don't wanna be jealous, so I gotta be cool with everything." And I think that is definitely one thing that I want people to kind of be aware of is, like, not every negative emotion that you have is jealousy. You don't have
Yes.
to be cool with everything. Like, listen to yourself a little bit. It's kinda hard. Like, I think it comes with practice in general in life, right? Like, listening to your intuition, being able to trust yourself and trust your own kind of internal warning systems. But that definitely, I think, especially in non-monogamy, and especially if you are in communities where I feel like it's getting better, but definitely when I was a young person, whatever. When I was practicing polyamory, earlier, like a decade ago, I felt like there was such a strong almost shame a little bit and feeling jealousy and almost this kind of like, you must not be jealous. We all say there's no one right way to practice polyamory, but then the sort of underlying message is the best way is to not be jealous and
Right.
to be happy with everything, right? So I really, really want people to understand that, hey, it's okay if you're jealous. Like I wasn't jealous. I was reasonably reacting to the situation, but also that if you have something that's coming up, it's not necessarily sort of unprocessed monogamy or whatever. Or like, it can be just a genuine feeling that you should pay attention to. So yeah, some of them are based off of like my own experiences and things that I just wanted people to grasp because I know it can be very easy, especially if you're new to something and you feel unsure to just kind of brush off those things and go like, oh, well, it doesn't matter. I'm just being jealous when it's not actually jealousy.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, I love that because it seems like people often almost like gaslight themselves into not believing that there's something wrong or something
Yeah.
bad happening in the like name or shame or guilt of feeling jealous. Right. And it's like actually like jealousy is a thing that it's an emotion we experience and it might be there for a real reason.
Yeah. You can be jealous for a very valid reason. Just because you're jealous also doesn't mean that that's wrong. Like sometimes it's a sign that you're not getting the things that you need, and it's can be really really painful to like if you want something from your partner and your partner's not giving that, and you decide, okay, well I don't want to leave, so I just accept the fact that this partner can't provide that for me, and I accept the price of admission, as Dan Savage says. And
Yeah.
then you see them giving it to someone else, and you're like, hold on a minute. Like, wait, like you're gonna experience a huge amount of jealousy, and that's totally called for. It's not that jealousy is, always this negative thing that's never called for. Sometimes it's very called for.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Have you always been non-monogamous or did you like go from monogamy to non-monogamy?
It's really interesting because when I was younger, I was very strange. I feel like I knew about like marriage and divorce and things like that. And technically, I don't wanna say that, like, my parents were non-monogamous because they weren't. It was a weird situation where, like, they weren't really together, so it didn't really but I remember, like, when I started liking one celebrity and stopped liking another celebrity, writing, like, divorce papers between me and that celebrity, and then marriage papers, and then custody papers for my baby dolls is very strange.
Hello.
I feel like I was always, my attraction to other people, I kind of a little bit on the demisexual, gray sex, so I don't tend to get attracted to people very often. So what I find a lot in non-monogamy is there are a lot of people who are just like, I just feel so attracted to so many people. And it's not necessarily the case for me. But I think where I sort of had a bit of an inkling was in one of my relationships, my first relationship. It was it was a, a great relationship. Like it's so much I grew so much in it. But it was an online relationship and it was with somebody who lived in Australia. And I was very, very self-conscious about it because tons of people, I mean, this was early in the days of like, now online relationships are pretty typical, but back in that day it was like if you've never met them, you don't know them, you can't love them. So I was very much in the idea of like, no, I love this person and no one's going to tell me otherwise. And whilst I was in that relationship and I felt that strongly about them, I felt myself being attracted to other people. And that was the kind of first time no one was going to tell me I didn't love my partner. And then I was like, okay, well, I can be attracted to other people and still really love my partner because that was never a question. And it didn't end up, I mean, it was when I was like 18 and going to uni. And so it was, and we promised that we would wait until he could come and visit me. That was the whole thing. Like we'll be exclusive. Um, and then when he said like, "Oh, I don't know if I could do this exclusivity anymore," I kind of continued mentally on as if we were still in a relationship. I was like, "That's fine." Technically, I was broken up with, but I was just like, "Ah, it's okay. We can't be exclusive anymore. I don't care." And then he would like told me, "Oh, I found a girlfriend here." I was like, "Well, that's fine." Like I really didn't genuinely mind, and that in a way worked against me because I was just like, "Yeah, whatever." Like, yeah, I was
Yeah,
waking
makes
up at,
sense.
like, 3 a.m. to see if he was, because he was in Australia, so the time difference. I was waking up at 3 a.m. to check and see if he was online. I was like, "Yeah, whatever. I don't mind." And then it was when he told me, like, "Oh, I can't say I love you anymore because it's making me feel bad because I'm actually, falling for this other person." That was the moment that hit me in the face like a ton of bricks, and I was like,
Oh,
"Oh god," and, like, started, that was when I got really mad at him and like, yeah, so I think that was an interesting thing. I think it's less been that I have a super huge desire to date loads of people and more that I'm just like, I don't mind." Like, it doesn't bother me. And over time, like, I felt, as I when I came out as bi as well, and then I was like, "Well, monogamy isn't really gonna work," because, like, there was a guy who I spoke to I was interested in, and I was eventually gonna move to the UK, but he wanted to be monogamous, and he was like, "Well, I'm never gonna be interested in any kind of," because I was like, "Okay, well, maybe threesome or, like, like, maybe like, I'm bisexual, but I've never dated a woman, and, I would like to have that opportunity," and he was like, "No, that's never gonna happen." So I was like, "Oh, well, then maybe we don't get together," like, and eventually I kind of came to the conclusion, like, okay, this is an option because I was super interested in human sexuality and I was listening to a lot of podcasts. Like, the concept of swinging was first kind of introduced, and then the concept of not the polyamory fit more because I was less necessarily interested in the swinging aspect and more interested in the relationship. So I wouldn't say that I'm like, I don't know as that I necessarily identify as being inherently non-monogamous, but I feel like for me, definitely traditional monogamy where, like, you're expected to pretend like your partner is the only one that you're ever attracted to. I feel like that almost erases my identity and being attracted to more than one type of person and more than one gender. Like, I don't want to pretend like I'm straight essentially if I'm dating a man, or pretend like I'm a lesbian if I'm dating a woman, or however those
right.
configurations end up. And I also now it's really weird, like, first when I was really interested in non-monogamy, it was because I wanted a big family and I wanted, like, multiple parents and I wanted to, like, 7 children and a lot, and now I'm like, I don't want any children at all. And I'm much more of a solo polyam person, like, I like being by myself and I like that independence. So I think I definitely couldn't go back to a super traditional monogamy, and I don't really wanna live with anyone, which is typically what people, even if they don't get married, like, that's the thing that they end up doing.
Yeah.
Um, so I think, like, yeah, I don't know as that traditional monogamy would ever work for me, and I would much rather have the freedom and autonomy. Mostly it's just been, I've said, when in every 10 years precisely when the planets line ever so nicely and I'm attracted to someone and they're attracted to me, I would like the opportunity to see where that goes. And that's been my main, like, that's my anchor, my main motivation for being interested in it. But, like, also having the personal autonomy, like, that's really, really important for me. So
Yeah,
so yeah,
no.
it's never been a kind of thing where I've felt like, "Oh, this is how I naturally am." It's just more or less, and I don't necessarily think that that always comes from a good place necessarily. Like, I there's something I can go into that, in a bit, but, like, basically to answer your question without rambling a bit more, um, I'm I wouldn't say it's an inherent part of who I am, but, like, I couldn't see myself being traditionally monogamous at all at
Uh-huh.
at this point.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a ton of sense. Same, like like I have a family and a husband and kids and a roommate and multiple partners. I could never go back. I absolutely could not go back to the traditional monogamous structure. I mean, I could wind up monogamous just out of circumstance, but right, but not like monogamous out of like, this is our agreement.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
And I'm hoping that monogamy is changing a little bit as well, and that people are
Yeah.
moving out of the idea of, like, because I don't think that's good for monogamous people, the sort of false idea that you're only ever attracted to this one person. I think that that doesn't lead to good places. So I am hoping that I do think monogamy is shifting a little bit more and people are less, held to the sort of traditional, what we would call traditional. I don't know if it's actually traditional, but what we perceive as the traditional concept of monogamy. I'm hoping people are moving a little bit away from the more unhealthier aspects of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Monogamy is a like intentional choice where you talk about all the things and not make assumptions.
Mhm.
Yeah, totally. Totally. There's lots of reasons for it. um you mentioned um you mentioned a thing that I wanted to ask you about.
No worries.
Oh, you mentioned anchor, and in the
Yay.
introduction of the non-monogamy journal, you talk about finding your anchor. Could you talk a
Mhm.
little bit about what that is?
Yeah. So the anchor is kind of a concept that I came up with because I think that if you're interested in opening a relationship or you're interested in non-monogamy, either way, I think I'd say most people come at non-monogamy when they're already in a relationship. Like that's tends to be the typical track. I think that it's difficult to find, but I really feel like you need to find a reason for being interested in non-monogamy that isn't keeping your current relationship the same exact way it is. And I think it's hard for people, right? Because if their partner comes to them and says, "I want to open our relationship," they're going to be motivated to say yes because they don't want to lose that person. And I don't think that's a bad motivation, but I do think, and I try to explain to people that keeping your relationship isn't really an option if you're opening it because your relationship is fundamentally going to change. It's like trying to say yes to a in-person relationship when it's shifting to long distance. Like it's not that you don't love each other, it's that that's the structure, the physical structure of the way you spend time is going to change in a really big way. And I think that if you want a reason, if you want something to hold on to, having an anchor, having a reason why you're interested in it, even if it's just like, "Oh, I'd like to have sex with more people." That's fine. It's a perfectly fine anchor. If it's I say if it's, you like to have your alone time, that's a perfectly fine anchor. If it's that you want to date other people, that's a fine anchor. It's about why am I personally motivated and in a reason that doesn't have to do with saving this relationship. And I think that's really important because during times when you're like, "Oh, why has this happened?" Like, you're gonna have some emotional ups and downs, and I know my book is, like, called The Anxious Person's Guide. I think that anxiety is actually a pretty normal reaction for most people to their relationship opening, and I don't think that you necessarily have to be an anxious person to be super anxious when that's happening.
Yeah.
So, you're gonna have these ups and downs, you're gonna have this fear, you're gonna have this I always talk about, like, the first night that your partner spends with someone else or out on a date, you're probably gonna feel like shit. Like, you're gonna feel terrible.
Mhm.
Maybe you won't, but I think you are. You probably are, because you're rebuilding those foundations of trust. You have to see that they come back to you. Mentally, you've been in a monocentric society your whole life that's telling you this is bad, and you're not just gonna be able to think your way out of it. Like, it's their emotions are gonna happen. And I think when you're kind of stuck in that, like, tumultuous sea of like, remembering that there's a personal reason that's just for you can really ground you because you can be like, "Okay, I know I'm doing this for a reason." It's kind of the same if you're having any major lifestyle change. If you're getting a PhD, like, that's stressful as hell. When you're in the middle of trying to figure out the exams or knowing, "Okay, I'm doing this for a reason," is really important. And I think we all have anchors in different during different life scenarios, but I think it's so culturally scripted in a lot of ways that we don't think of it as an anchor. So, like, if your kids is a big example, like, having kids is not a picnic. There are definitely ups and downs. There are definitely emotionally trying moments, and it's kind of easy to see when a kid's right in front of you. Maybe sometimes when it's really difficult, not so easy, but it's easy to see, like, this is why I'm doing it because I love my kid and I had a kid for a reason. Maybe I don't know, speak for everyone's situation, but you have a personal reason that
Yeah.
isn't that, this child will remain a baby for the rest of their life, like, you have a reason beyond that. And so, yeah, I wanted people to think of when they're starting out, when they're deciding if this for me, and it might not be something they know right away, like, it might take a little bit of practice, but I think it can be much more helpful because I think if you the only reason you're trying this is to keep your relationship the same way it is, it's just not gonna work because it's just not gonna be the same. I tell people, like, you are going to get less time with your partner. Fundamentally, like, regardless of what style of non-monogamy you practice, regardless of the way you decide to do it, fundamentally, you will have less time with them. And so you have to be okay with that first. But then if there's a personal reason why you're okay with that, like, okay, I like spending the time on my own. I'll have this time to pursue my own stuff whatever it is, I think it's really important to have because I think the reason that people tend to think of is, "Oh, I'll save the relationship." And even though that's not a bad motivation, it's not a very good reason, and it's gonna fail you during those intense moments because if you're in that intense moment, you're like, "Oh, I'm trying to save my relationship," but they're out with somebody else. Like, I fundamentally, I just don't think that works in your brain. I think you're gonna go, "Well, they're out with someone else, so that's not working," you know?
Uh-huh. Yeah, I agree 100%. I call it the North Star, but that, like, thing that makes it worth going through all the hard stuff. I tell the story all the time on the show, but I was very, very, jealous and just really had a hard time deconditioning from just all of these monogamous ideas. And also, every time my partner was like, "We could close up, we could be monogamous," I was like, "Hell no. That is the
Mhm.
opposite of what I want. I wanna get through this. I wanna get to the other side of it so I can have all the fun." Like,
Yeah.
I wanna keep doing this work. Like, I had a reason to go through terrible feelings.
Mhm. And I think you bring up such a good point because that's another aspect of having an anchor that's really important is that there are a lot of times when people it gets really difficult and people are like, "We'll just close it. We'll just close it." And it's
Yeah,
just like you need to go through the situation and the more you avoid like my experience with anxiety at least when I've had really bad anxiety like panic attacks every night, serious anxiety. The more that you give anxiety an inch and it will take a mile. The more you avoid the situation, the more the more strength you give it over you, the more power you give it
mhm.
over you. And you also can't work on the situation if you're not in the situation.
Yeah,
Like you can think about it and theorize it all you want, but you have to actually go through the situation in order to show yourself like, "Okay, I survived. I'm fine. It's not the end of the world. We're gonna be okay." Like, you there isn't a shortcut through that, unfortunately.
absolutely, absolutely, 100%. I I work with a lot of people who are like, "Yeah, in theory, I've got this down," and then, shit hits the fan and they're like, "Oh, I'm right back where we started. Why did that
I
happen?" I'm like,
always
"Well."
I I always try to encourage people, like, expect yourself to feel bad. Because the at worst comes to worst, if you don't feel bad, that's great. But, like, expect yourself to feel bad, and not because it is bad, but because, it's a new emotional experience, you're rebuilding like, expect yourself to feel difficult. But everybody really wants this to, like, work out perfectly and to never have any bad emotions. And I think it's a little silly in some ways, like, not that they're silly to think about, but I try to tell them, like, if you were going bungee jumping, you would
Right.
never expect yourself to be like, "Oh, I'm not gonna be afraid at all." Like, if you were shitting your pants on the air or on like, set looking over the side of the cliff, you'd be like, "Okay, you would expect yourself to be afraid. And in that regard, allowing yourself permission to have those feelings I wouldn't go bungee jumping, but, allowing yourself to have those feelings makes it a little bit easier. But if you tell yourself, like, I've read all the things, I'm gonna be fine, I'm not gonna have like, I think it just makes it so much worse because you're not pushing up a boulder, up a hill. Like, it feels that way. And I used to envision my anxiety as that. Like, I was always pushing up a boulder up a hill. And if I had a panic attack, it meant it rolled down and I'd failed. And I started to think about in context of other, like, if I get a cold, does that mean I failed? No, I just have a cold. So if you have emotions, it doesn't mean you failed. It doesn't mean you've backtracked. You're just a human. Like I feel like so much of my column and sometimes my advice is just giving people permission to have feelings.
Yep. Dig that. Yeah, your emotional immune system is weakened.
Yeah.
Next. That's amazing. You had in the anxious person's guide, you talk about a self-care emergency protocol. And I'm curious what does that entail or what are some important pieces of that that people should have?
I think this is part of that kind of mental preparedness of like expecting yourself to feel a little crap. And I feel like the advice that people are often given in a lot of communities is like, okay, the first time that your partner is out on a date, take yourself out on a date night or like meet up with friends. And sometimes it's not always possible to like align things perfectly. Like, yes, it would be great. And I think people play polyamory chicken sometimes and like who gets the first date, who go like, and your schedules are never gonna always sync up. Like, you're never gonna have a same first date on the same night. Oh, perfect. Like, that's just not gonna happen. And maybe your friends are busy. Like, you're not like, as much as I think that advice isn't bad, like, yeah, if you can hang out with friends and distract yourself, perfect, wonderful. But I don't think that that's always the case. And I do think that especially when you're just starting out, like the first couple of times, you are going to feel a little bit crap. It's not going to feel great. And also, I think there's an element of avoidance, even with hanging out with friends. Like you're
Mhm.
avoiding that kind of emotional ups and downs. So I think like having a self-care kind of kit of like, okay, what do I do if I feel really crap? Do I have things put away, like, whether it's a coloring book or whether it's this is what I do when I feel bad or this is who I can talk to, this is who I can call, and making sure because I think when you're in the moment, especially if you have any kind of trauma around being a burden to anybody, right? Like
Zima.
you don't really always, like, feel like you can reach out. You may have tons of friends, but you may not feel like you can reach out to them. So I think preparing that ahead of time and thinking about, "Okay, who will I feel comfortable," and even asking ahead of time. You can always ask that of friends and be like, "Hey, do you have can I call you when I'm feeling bad?" I don't think the idea of, like, giving yourself a date is necessarily bad, like, if you have comforting movies, if you have comforting things, but I think it's about putting yourself in those situations ahead of time mentally and thinking about how would I then get help? Because I think sometimes, like I said, it's the newness of the situation where you don't really think about it. And I think especially for people who just think that, oh, I'll be able to research myself out of feelings, the sort of bricks hit even harder in that situation because you don't like the research that you can sometimes do isn't around what will I do if I feel bad. It's just like, I'm just not gonna feel bad, because I've read, I'm just not gonna feel bad. So
Yeah.
I wanna get people just even thinking of, if I do feel bad, here's what I'm gonna do. Because I think even just having that thought process ahead of time helps out so, so much. And I think, yeah, it may not work, like, you still may feel crap, but at least you've thought about it, and at least you've had a moment to think about, like, "Okay, if I feel crap, this is what I'm gonna do." And I think that at least having it also will put a little bit of ease on yourself because then you're hopefully spending time taking care of yourself instead of punishing yourself for having feelings. Because I've been in so many situations where I just thought, "I don't wanna have feelings, so I'm gonna sit here and punish myself for having them instead of actually addressing them," and thinking that's addressing them. Like, I've been
Right.
in a lot of where I've been like, "This is me addressing it, punishing myself for having it. That's not addressing it either." Right?
Yeah. 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 I always tell, excuse me. I always tell people to make their plan and then write it all down because when
Yeah.
you're like in it, when you're having like these
Mhm.
big activated feelings, it's hard to remember what your plan was or what you
Yeah.
were going to do to stay busy and take care of yourself. So I'm like, write it all down so you know what you can look at it and go, oh, that's what I could do. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
I was going to uh, go for a walk and then embroider and then pet my cat.
Yeah.
Like, what was
Yeah.
my plan?
Yeah. Because I mean, your brain is when it's activated, you're not in, like, a learning state,
Yeah.
right? You're in an activated state. Your brain is like, "Oh my god, this is a bad." I mean, in monogamy, this would be a bad situation. Your partner being
Mhm.
out with somebody else would be a really bad situation. So, your brain is going like, "Wait a minute, this is bad. We're supposed to freak out right now, right?" And you have to kind of sit for a moment and sit in those feelings a little bit and deal with that and then see and come out the other end and go, "Okay, I survived." I mean, it will be a bad thing and a difficult thing for people if they do end up having a partner that breaks up with them or that, does dump them for somebody else, which can happen. Like there but that can happen in any relationship. Being monogamous doesn't protect you from bad things happening. It's not going to prevent someone from leaving you. But I think, you just have to kind of build that trust within yourself. And if you have those tools, that also I think tells you I've got me, and building that trust with yourself really, really helps you deal with anything else coming down the way.
Mhm. 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 Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, totally. I'm curious is if you have a most memorable or standout or awkward or weird like question or piece of advice someone has looked for.
The things that have always kind of taken me aback have been things that have made me kind of sad. And
Oh.
that's been situations that haven't been about non monogamy.
Uh-huh.
It's just been a situation where clearly this person is being mistreated. And non-monogamy is part of that because they're being asked to be okay with their partner being with other people. But that's not really the problem. The
Yeah.
problem is, like, they're being mistreated, and those are the situations that always take me aback and make me go, "Oof, ouch." I think there was one I can't remember it exactly, I think that it was called Replacement Girlfriend or something in my column or on my podcast, and it was a situation where somebody wrote me, and I think that they said that they had, like basically, they had cancer and it was terminal, and their partner was not really, like, asking them to be okay with an open relationship, and they felt like they were just auditioning for their replacement.
Yeah.
And from the sound of it, obviously, when I get a letter, I only get one side of the story,
Yeah.
right? So I don't necessarily know. But from the sound of it, it just sounded like their partner was being so unsupportive. And that was what really made me sad because they were asking me, how do I be okay with this? Because I don't want to dump them. I might, I'm terminal, and how do I be okay with this? And that's been like the situations that really kind of hit me and there was one actually as well that I recently published called Trapped in a Thruple, where it's literally like a situation where somebody moved in with some people very like after dating for 1 month, like very fast. They had no job, they had kids, and they were basically being used as a live-in babysitter. And they're like, "How do I be okay with being in a throuple?" And I'm like, "The throuple is not the issue here. The Iranian yogurt is not the issue here." Like, it's like you're being mistreated. Like, those are the things that really, because it's always the people who really wanna be okay with
Mhm.
non-monogamy, and they're not writing to me because they think they're in a bad relationship. They're writing to me because they wanna be okay with being non-monogamous. And I'm
Yeah.
like, "You shouldn't be okay with this relationship, period. Non-monogamy is not the problem here." Like, those are the situations that really make me go, "Oof." 'Cause it's just it's so sad, and I wish the best for them, and I hope that I help them, but they really genuinely need sometimes, like I mean, I'm not a therapist, I don't know if I can't diagnose anyone, but, I think that they probably need a better help than I can give them, so, yeah, those are
Right.
the ones that really kinda hit me, like, "Ooh," like, I feel really bad for them.
Mhm. 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 Yeah. No, that's relatable. Those are the hardest ones for me. I'm like, you I mean, we can talk all day long about non-monogamy, but that is not the issue.
Yeah,
You don't
it
need
is so, like
a different agreement.
Yeah, you don't need to overcome your monogamous tendencies. Yes, there is a whole side of this that is emotional management, that is getting, but that's within the context of a healthy relationship, and
Yes.
you don't have that.
Yes.
So it's
Yeah.
not going to work. I could give you the best tips and advice for managing your emotions, but that's not going to fix the fact that you're not being treated well. Eh,
That that
yeah.
uh um is there anything that I haven't asked you that you want to share?
That's a good question. I think first and foremost, I think that what I hope that people get out of the journal at least is just that, they can do it on their own. They can do it with partners and stuff like that. I'm very much hoping that it allows them to come up with better agreements with their partners or feel empowered to know what to ask for from other people. Because I think like I said, so many times things like this come up. And if they've already happened, you trying to negotiate your boundaries around a situation that's already happened is sometimes really, really tricky, and so I'm really hoping that it allows people to kind of think about these things, work through them, maybe talk with them with a partner. Because I have been in situations where I've been in relationships and I don't wanna end those relationships, but situate things have happened that I'm like, "Ooh, would I have agreed to this relationship if I'd have known this beforehand? Maybe not." So I'm hoping that that is the case, and I think mostly I just want people to know that, like, it's very normal to have up and down feelings. Like, it's very, very normal to be anxious about stuff. It's very, very normal to not have any idea what to do. I am really, really hoping I'm trying to put together a course actually because I feel like the advice everyone gets is just read, read, read. And I've written books, so I'm not going to tell you not to read. That would be stupid of me. But I think that there are very practical things that people can put in place right away when they both know that they would generally, like I said, generally it's two people opening up. But even so, I think they're very practical things people can put in place. And what I'm hoping to do is put together a course that helps them put those things in place right away. They can still read. I still think it's important to read things and get to know concepts and explore things. And some of this stuff is going to take time anyway. But I really, really hope to have that so that people can go, okay, what can we do now to make things a little bit easier? Because I think waiting 6 months to do all the reading and staying in basically in a monogamous relationship while doing that can sometimes make things even harder
Yeah.
down the line. So that's what I'm hoping that to be able to put together and this year, hopefully that's the goal. So yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant. I love that. How can people find you and your books?
You can go to nonmonogamyhelp.com. All my stuff is on there. I do have I should have a thing that tells you that if you sign up to my newsletter, you can get a discount on the books. If I don't, now you know. And if I do put I should have a pop up, but I don't know how it works all the time. I should have as well when my course does come out. I should have more information on there. But like, yeah, you can find the podcast and all the columns there. I do have like I put the podcast out on I think all the platforms that it can be out. Then the Anxious Guide is also an audiobook. And I'm hoping that I mean, I don't think the journal will become an audiobook because it's not really an audiobook style. It's more
Yeah.
of a sit
Yeah.
down and writes type of thing. But yeah, you can find everything there. And I am on most I think I'm on X still, although I'm not really posting very much on there. And then I'm on Instagram and TikTok as well. So yeah, you can find me on at non-monogamy help and non-mono help on TikTok.
Amazing. Amazing. And of course, I'll put all that in the show notes so people can just like click on things.
Yeah, I don't
Okay, I
have
have
to
one more
remember.
question. Right, exactly. I have one more question, and this is not on the regular podcast, but is for our Patreon supporters at patreon.com/notmonogamous, and it's
Mhm.
called Just the Tip, and
Mhm.
and it's what is your best or favorite sex tip that you would offer the listeners? I love that. That's so good. Thank you. That's so
Yeah,
good. Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been delightful.
yeah. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.